For 2 whole years, I was the invisible one in the room, the ghost behind every stunning pitch, every perfectly timed animation, every slide transition that made the audience go wow. I was the person who fixed alignment issues at midnight, who color-corrected charts for consistency, who silently updated the speaker notes because the VP forgot again to include their main talking points. I never got credit. I never expected it. I was 23 when I joined the consulting firm. A fresh graduate with a degree in communication studies, I was eager, broke, and hopeful. The job I landed was technically titled Presentation Support Analyst, which is corporate code for PowerPoint monkey. I didn't mind. I wanted into the rooms where decisions were made, where ideas were sold, and where careers were launched. At first, my tasks were simple. Adjust font sizes. Replace stock photos. Move bullet points around to make them pop. But I had an eye for rhythm, for flow, for storytelling. And it didn't take long before senior consultants started asking for me by name. Get Mia to polish this deck. Send it to Mia, she knows what I mean when I say Apple-style minimalism. Mia, can you fix this? They meant fix in the way people mean save. I took their jumbled slides, their half-baked graphs, their cluttered text boxes, and turned them into clear, persuasive, elegant visual stories. But I was never the one telling the story. Instead, I stood behind the glass walls of the control room, watching someone else stand on stage, using my words, my visuals, my transitions, to win the room. Every time I saw a round of applause or a firm handshake after a pitch, I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was more like anticipation. A whisper inside me saying, you could do that. You will do that. But no one saw me that way. To them, I was the slide girl. Reliable. Fast. Quiet. I sat in the back of every major presentation. Laptop open, ready to advance slides or troubleshoot. I watched directors charm skeptical clients. I listened as executives delivered narratives I had helped shape. And while they basked in praise, I collected scraps. A passing nice work from a VP. A thank you email sent at 1 a.m. A name drop in a Slack channel no one important read. Still, I took mental notes. I observed how they opened with emotion. How they anticipated objections. How they closed deals not with data, but with stories. And all the while, I refined my own internal voice, not just for writing, but for speaking. No one knew it, but I had started staying late not just to finish decks, but to practice. I'd walk into empty conference rooms after hours, load up a client deck I built, and pretend I was the one presenting. I rehearsed my timing. My posture. My tone. I imagined how I'd answer tough questions. How I'd own the silence between key slides. It was silly. Or so I thought. Until the day everything changed. That morning, the office was buzzing. One of our biggest clients was visiting for a live strategy pitch. We'd been working on the deck for weeks, or rather, I had. The lead partner, Julia, had done 3 walkthroughs with me, but never made time to rehearse with the team. It didn't matter, that's how it usually went. Until 8:13 a.m., when Julia called in sick with a severe case of food poisoning. Panic. Total panic. We had 20 minutes before the client arrived. Everyone looked at everyone else, hoping someone, anyone, could step in. No one volunteered. Then our director, Mr. Holland, turned slowly to me. You know the content, he said. Probably better than anyone else in the room. I laughed nervously. You want me to present? He nodded. Can you do it? My hands were cold. My heart was pounding. But something in me clicked. That whisper, that hunger, it rose to the surface. I can. And just like that, after 2 years in the shadows, I stepped into the light. I picked up the clicker. And I walked to the stage. The walk from the side of the room to the front felt like a mile. My heels clicked on the polished floor. The air felt too cold. Every eye in that glass conference room turned to me, the client's team of 4 sharp-dressed executives, our internal team, my director, and 2 junior consultants who looked as shocked as I felt. No one said a word as I took Julia's place behind the podium. I had written this presentation. I had redesigned it 3 times. I had memorized every transition, every point, every graph. But now that it was my voice echoing off the walls, I wasn't sure if I would remember how to breathe. I looked up and met their eyes. "Good morning," I said. My voice held steady. That was a small miracle. "I know you were expecting Julia to lead today's pitch, but she's come down with something last minute. So I'll be walking you through our proposed strategy." Pause. Don't apologize. Don't downplay yourself. Trust the content. I clicked to the first slide, a clean, wide title with a bold message, "Future-proofing your growth, a 3-year adaptive framework." I began. Slowly. Clearly. Just like I had practiced in empty rooms for the past year. But this time, it wasn't a rehearsal. This time, the room was full of decision-makers. This time, it mattered. The first few minutes were shaky. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. But once I passed the market analysis slide, the one I had redrawn twice and knew inside and out, something shifted. I started to breathe. The pacing felt natural. The words didn't feel rehearsed, they felt like mine. Because they were. 10 minutes in, I noticed something I never thought I'd see, the clients leaning in. They weren't just being polite, they were engaged. Nodding. Taking notes. When I flipped to a breakdown of cost-saving projections, one of them even raised a brow and whispered something to the person next to him. That was new. My own team was dead silent. No one interrupted. No one jumped in. Mr. Holland had his hands clasped under his chin, staring like he was seeing me for the first time. At the 20-minute mark, I arrived at the story slide, the case study about how our framework saved a previous client $1.2 million in their second year of implementation. I had written it with care, framing it like a narrative arc with stakes and resolution. Now, standing under the lights, I told it like a real story. Not bullet points, a journey. And I saw it in their faces, this was working. The room was quiet in the best possible way. Focused. Then came the Q&A. I braced myself. The client's lead strategist, a silver-haired man named Alan, flipped his notepad and asked about long-term integration risks. It was a fair question. One that Julia had planned to deflect. But I had done my homework. I took a breath, broke the answer into 3 parts, and even cited a pilot model I had suggested including in the appendix 2 days earlier. Alan nodded. He scribbled something. Then smiled. I had just passed my first test. When the pitch wrapped, I clicked to the final slide. A clean, minimal thank you with our contact info. I stepped back and smiled. There was a beat of silence, then the client team stood to shake hands. Alan offered his first. "Impressive," he said. "That was sharp and well-paced. Honestly, I wouldn't have known it was your first time if you hadn't said so." My mouth dried, but I managed to smile. "Thank you. I'm glad the content resonated." As the room slowly emptied, Mr. Holland came over. He didn't say much. Just this. "You know, I think we underestimated you." That night, I stayed late, again. But this time, it wasn't to clean up someone else's work. I sat alone in the quiet office, looking at the podium where I had stood just hours before. For the first time in 2 years, I hadn't just built a presentation. I had delivered one. And it wouldn't be the last. The following Monday, something was different. People looked at me in the hallway. Not in a dramatic, head-turning way, but there were glances, nods, an extra beat of eye contact. I wasn't invisible anymore. And when I walked into the conference room for the weekly strategy meeting, one of the junior analysts, Marcus, actually pulled out a chair for me. That had never happened before. Julia wasn't back yet, and I assumed she'd be annoyed once she heard I had taken her spot. But instead of the cold shoulder I expected, I got something much more complicated. She returned mid-week, breezing in like a storm, eyes sharp, smile thinner than paper. I stood up as she entered, out of habit. "Mia," she said flatly. "Heard you did the pitch." I smiled cautiously. "Yes, I did. It went well." That was it. No follow-up. No thank you. She turned away and started speaking to someone else. And that was when it started, the quiet pushback. Suddenly, I wasn't being looped into calls I usually handled. Decks that I would normally finalize were being passed to someone else. Julia stopped giving me revision notes directly, she began going through Marcus instead, who barely understood the structure. And when I asked if I was still prepping slides for next month's client summit, something I'd always done, she just said, "We're trying someone new this time." At first, I thought I was being paranoid. But it wasn't just Julia. One by one, I started noticing how others in the department, especially the more senior women, became cautious around me. Some were cold. Others overly polite. No one said anything openly, but the vibe was unmistakable, you stepped out of place. It wasn't about the quality of my work, it never had been. It was about visibility. Power. Territory. I was the quiet slide maker. I was supposed to stay in the background. But now that I'd proven I could lead a pitch, and not just any pitch, but one that got glowing feedback from a major client, I was no longer convenient. I was competition. Still, I refused to shrink back. If the door to the main stage had cracked open, I wasn't going to pretend I didn't see the light coming through. I started speaking up more during meetings. Not loudly, but with clarity. I offered story framing ideas, delivery tweaks, and sometimes, respectfully questioned the flow of someone else's structure. When Mr. Holland asked for help with a new client presentation, I volunteered, and delivered a draft within 12 hours. He thanked me publicly. Said my outline was executive grade. That did not go unnoticed. The HR partner invited me for coffee soon after. She had been in the presentation, too, sitting silently in the back. She said she was impressed. "You know," she said, stirring her drink, "we've been talking about revamping our communications leadership track. Might be something worth discussing soon." I smiled but didn't say much. My instinct told me to be careful. That was the problem with growing inside a system that only liked you when you were quiet. The moment you showed ambition, you had to play twice as smart, twice as diplomatic. By the time the quarterly town hall rolled around, I was prepared. Mr. Holland asked me to co-present the firm's new branding initiative. I designed the visuals, of course, but this time I was also co-delivering the strategy alongside him. He introduced me by name, gave credit to my slide design and my storytelling, and then handed me the clicker. As I stood on that internal stage in front of 120 employees, I didn't shake. I didn't stutter. I told our firm's story, and I told it well. People clapped. I saw nods. I even saw a few people taking pictures of the slides. Something I had only seen done when partners spoke. But Julia? Julia didn't clap. She sat in the front row, arms crossed, face unreadable. And in that moment, I understood something very clearly. This wasn't just about slides. This was about power. Identity. Control. I wasn't just the girl who made decks anymore. I was becoming a voice. And not everyone was ready for that. 3 weeks after the town hall, things fell apart. At first, it was subtle, a missing file here, a miscommunication there. Then came the real blow. One Thursday afternoon, as I was preparing to head out, I got a Slack message from Marcus. "Hey, Julia said there was a formatting error in your client deck for Horizon Group. Thought you should know." My stomach dropped. Horizon Group was one of our newest clients, and I had personally led the deck design and storyboarding. I'd gone through 5 rounds of feedback. Triple-checked every single slide. I opened the shared folder. To my shock, the deck was wrong. It was missing the updated timeline, the corrected charts, and even had outdated branding. My version had been replaced. But not by accident. The metadata showed it had been overwritten 2 hours earlier, by Julia. I confronted her privately. "Julia, the Horizon deck in the shared folder, did you update it?" She didn't even look surprised. "Yes. The version you sent had inconsistencies." "That's not possible," I said. "I checked everything. Twice." "I'm not here to argue, Mia." The client was confused. We had to do damage control. I knew what she was doing. Gaslighting me in broad daylight. There had been no client confusion, I checked the meeting notes. But she had created a narrative, and now she was planting it. The next day, I was pulled into a performance alignment meeting with Mr. Holland and an HR rep. They talked vaguely about growing pains and communication gaps and accountability. Julia wasn't there, of course. She didn't have to be. Her fingerprints were all over it, even if she wasn't in the room. I realized what was happening. I had flown too close to the sun, and now the ones who built their power on silence and order were clipping my wings. After the meeting, I sat at my desk with my headset still around my neck, staring at my inbox. Messages came in. Edits. Requests. I kept clicking through, but none of it registered. I felt small. Smaller than I had in my first week, when I was nobody. Except now, I knew too much. I knew what it felt like to stand on stage. To matter. I had 2 choices. 1, shrink back into my corner, play it safe, keep my head down, and hope they forgave me. 2, or go bigger. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the office with a thermos of coffee, locked in a quiet war room on the 17th floor. And I got to work. I built something new. A presentation, but not just any. It was a proposal. A bold, unapologetic, forward-thinking communications initiative that would completely change how our firm pitched, branded, and visualized every single idea. A centralized system. A scalable narrative approach. And yes, a leadership structure that included a presentation strategist as a key figure in early project planning. I backed it with data. I pulled performance metrics from our best campaigns, including the ones I had helped build in secret. I drafted a strategy memo, prepped mock-ups, and filmed a 2-minute pitch video. Then I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Holland. And I CC'd the firm's director of operations. No Julia. Not this time. When I walked into that meeting, I didn't apologize. I didn't defer. I presented. "This," I said, as I clicked through the first slide, "is how we stop treating presentations as last-minute chores and start using them as strategic assets." And this, I flipped to the second slide, with a line graph spiking upward. "Is the growth curve we unlock when storytelling is integrated, not patched on." Mr. Holland leaned back. The director of ops asked me to send over the full document. Neither of them said brilliant or approved right away. But they listened. They really listened. I walked out with no promises. No guarantees. But I had done what no one expected. I turned their power move into my launch pad. 1 week. That's how long it took before I got the email. Subject: follow-up on presentation strategy proposal. From Claire H., Director of Operations. Time: 9:43 a.m. I held my breath as I clicked it open. Mia. We were impressed by your initiative and clarity. We'd like you to present this to the full partner committee next Thursday. Mr. Holland will join you. Please block off 10 to 11 o'clock. Let me know if you need support, asterisk. Best. Claire. I reread it twice. 3 times. Not only had they read my proposal, they were taking it to the highest decision-making level in the company. And they wanted me to pitch it. This time, no one else would be standing in for me. No one would be tweaking my work behind my back. No one would be borrowing my words and slapping their name on the final product. This was my moment. And I wasn't going to waste it. The next 7 days, I prepped like my life depended on it. I refined every word, rehearsed transitions, worked with a designer to sharpen the visuals, and consulted with a former brand strategist who had left our company last year. She gave me insight into what had failed in the last initiative attempt, and why mine might actually land. I knew this pitch wouldn't just be evaluated on its content, it would be judged by who I was. Was I too junior? Was I being too bold? I couldn't control their bias, but I could control the narrative. So, I didn't just present an idea. I told a story. When Thursday came, I stepped into the executive boardroom wearing a navy suit, the first one I ever bought with my own money. My slides were loaded. My hands were steady. Mr. Holland nodded at me from across the table. Claire gave a small, encouraging smile. The partners filed in. Some of them knew me. Most didn't. But by the time I was 10 minutes into the presentation, they weren't on their phones. They weren't distracted. They were listening. And when I showed them what happened to conversion rates when we applied narrative-first strategy to our outreach campaigns, they sat up. When I presented the cost savings from systematizing visual storytelling across departments, they started nodding. And when I concluded with a slide that simply said, "Stop selling services. Start selling stories," the room went silent. Then came the questions. Tough ones. Sharp ones. Some skeptical, some defensive. But I was ready for all of them. I didn't fumble. I didn't defer. I answered like someone who had spent years watching this game from the shadows, absorbing every pattern, every flaw, every strength. Because I had. When the meeting ended, the senior partner stood up and said, "That's the most compelling internal pitch I've seen this year." And just like that, they approved a 6-month pilot program. And they made me the project lead. A month later, I moved out of the back office and into my own glass-walled workspace. I got a new title, Director of Presentation Strategy. I now sit in client meetings from the start, not just when it's time to make things pretty. I built a team. I set the standards. And yes, Julia still works here. But now she has to route all pitch materials through my department. And me? I still love making slides. But now, I don't build them for other people's voices. Now, I build them for my own. And every time I step onto that stage, I remember what it felt like to be invisible, to be the person who stayed behind, fixing everyone else's spotlight. I remember it. And I own the light just a little more.